Hi, Chris Duff over at Serious Land Capital, vacant land funding partner. Today, I wanted to jump back in from yesterday's podcast about that Tennessee deal going sideways that turned out to be a previously listed property twice over the last couple of years, and pretty disastrous scenario that had to get immediately into problem solving mode here. So even before we had discovered that, because of the lack of interest from the MLS listings, we wanted to examine doing an auction, an online auction specifically for the property. So it seems pretty common within Tennessee. We found a number of folks who operated in the area, and we were referred over to somebody who's had a lot of success doing online auctions in that central Tennessee region. This guy went out to visit the property over the weekend, and he's like, yeah, I mean, there's nothing sexy about this property. It's got a power line going through it. Obviously, we knew at least that, in accordance with our DD, that we definitely made some key mistakes. So we didn't miss everything. We just thought, okay, we're getting this at a low enough price per acre in relation to all these other properties. Not the sexiest land. Again, this was going to be more of a bull market buy. We built in a lot of preference to the deal to account for having inferior characteristics. But obviously, again, if the market has changed here, this is just a property that I would not have done currently, even if it hadn't been listed previously, in which case it would have just been an automatic no. I wouldn't have spent more than 2 minutes on it. But here we are, DK deep. So I asked this guy, hey, like, even if we can break even on this thing, that would be an absolutely tremendous outcome, accounting for the high risk issue of the previous time it was listed. It was basically listed right above where we bought it at. So it'd be an amazing outcome to get out of a lemon property. And the auctioneer was thinking, yeah, it should definitely be possible, but he was recommending doing an absolute auction because that tends to get higher pricing for an exit here. And I wasn't as familiar with the auction process. I had heard of reserve auctions before. So basically the key difference with reserve auctions, the seller can just set a reserve price so that if the bids don't reach that amount, they're not forced to sell the property. They can back out during the bidding process. So it's the buyers. I can understand why like there could be more hesitation, because it's like, all right, how serious is this sale actually being if the seller has recourse to actually backing out of a transaction, and they're not guaranteed to actually get the property, or maybe they want to look at other properties where they can confirm putting money down into it. So I understand that game theory psychology there. Whereas an absolute auction means that as soon as the bidding starts, seller is legally obligated to provide marketable title and close on the deal after the bidding process. And assuming there's even one bid coming in, that price has to be accepted. So, it is a gamble to go down that route. It was, certainly giving me some trepidation, because, I was starting to wonder, well, in this area, like, what happens if it sells for like pennies on the dollar? Like, one person shows up, gets, $100 bid in, and we're staring at like a 90K loss on the property, and we have to accept that price. So I really grilled the auctioneer about this, and I double checked his history too. It's like it's not his first rodeo. Like, I've seen previous properties that he's listed. He's done this at least 50 times, a number of them even within the last few months in the vicinity of where our property is. And I was like, out of all these ones that you've done, have you ever encountered a scenario where it is sold for pennies on the dollar? Like, that's worst case scenario for what could happen for us here. But he's like, that's never happened. Like, he has investors who are part of his list that always show up to these auctions, and it's just a competitive process. Like, no one's going to allow somebody to get something pennies on the dollar, because enough of these local investors understand that they can make even a relatively small profit. He's like, a number of these guys who show up, like, if they can move something for a margin of 10, 15 grand, that's fine for them. Like, people aren't necessarily looking to get flip level prices at these auctions. And since they're local, they can move efficiently, almost like a wholesale model type, or maybe they do some value add. I'm not sure. But he's like, that's tends to be the strategy here. And that fortunately, even though we have an unsexy property in the area, he's like, that particular county, the land prices are still very high, still, consistent activity, and that, the break even price that we would need to get to is at, close to half or even below half on a per acre level, like 4K per acre. So that stands in our favor, that it, unsexy land, but still what we need to get out of this is still going to be cheaper than anything else out there. And he's also hoping, hey, with land like this, sometimes out of state buyers and so forth, I could buy sight unseen, online auctions. People do that all the time. But, that's the scenarios that we have to consider here. And, while we can't guarantee the result, to me, this still felt like, okay, well, we already saw previous history of this property being listed on the MLS. I think it was marketed worse quality photos and all that, but it didn't move at like 100K roughly. What is our best option to get the most possible back, or lose the least amount of money? It's probably this auction, even this absolute sense where, hey, once this thing starts, we have to accept the result that comes out of it. And I was also, when it's an absolute auction too, the auctioneer takes more risk personally, because us as the sellers, we're not fronting any cash for any advertising expense. That's all the auctioneer, and he has to get enough commission from the buyer, because it's, like a lot of auctions, 10% commission paid by the buyer on top of the purchase price. So us as the sellers were only covering, whatever title would necessitate on our end to actually do transfer marketable title over to the buyer. Plus the buyer has to, immediately put down 10% cash EMD for the property and then close within 30 days. And he says, most of these auctions, like, they're closed within 2 to 3 weeks after the auction. So usually this is done, 3-week auction period, and usually, no more than 3 weeks for the actual close process. Yeah. And so, the auctioneer is incentivized, hey, he has to put up all of this these advertising dollars and doesn't get paid back until the auction is successful. So that incentive is in our favor for him to get as high of a price as possible. Plus, again, notoriety. If you get a bad result, the word of mouth would not be good, where it's like, hey, we signed up for this guy, he couldn't deliver a result. We ended up losing, tens of thousands of dollars on this. And he was indicating that, his investors were going to come in and get us a better result here. Big risk here. I'm going to be sweating bullets during that 3-week period. Once it's live. And I asked, like, how soon can we get this? First, we need a determination agreement from our broker, because you can't do an auction while it's being actively listed on the MLS. Fortunately, our broker is very understanding. He's like, yeah, I get it. I'll send you over the termination, and whenever you guys sell this, like, just come back and like cover whatever my marketing expenses were. I'm not expecting any commission. Like, best possible response we could have wanted, because on the listing agreement, we probably had like another 4 months of being under contract. So we got that taken care of. And then on the auctioneer side, he needs to confirm, that there's actually a marketable title. So, it goes to a title company and sorts all that out. Very fortunately, the title company we use to close on the property is the one that he goes to. So we already had the owner's titles policy, OTP, for that property. So that speeds it right along. No survey needed. Sometimes he says that'll be required, and it can delay the process. And we are going to be live in 2 weeks. So May 22nd is when the auction goes live. We've already signed the docs. It's go time to figure this piece out. Again, I did not come by this option willy-nilly here, really grilled the possible outcomes here, had to assess the risks, and out of all our remaining options here, sitting back on market or taking a admitted gamble on a absolute auction here, that this is our best chance to salvage what is a major fire within our portfolio. So wanted to provide you that info as we learn this and are going through it at the moment and crossing fingers about this auction. I will let you know as soon as we have some updates there. With that in mind, seriousland.capital for any of your funding needs. We actually have a ton of leads coming back in. It was a slow month last month, but now there's just so much. That's why I'm like just trying to get capital back out of some of these deals because there's some real screamers out there. Even as conservative as I've become now, like nothing under 2x. Like we got one in Florida earlier today that seems like a 2.5x. Even in this difficult macro, that 135K buy, I would really love to do. That I think could sell for at least 320, maybe more, closer to 400 potentially. That could be really interesting there. And then there's a handful of others that have come in as well. So, activity is creeping back up. Plus there's some other like $250,000, $500,000 ones that, you just got to be patient. Can't over-lever here. We have those really big deals coming back, especially that huge Texas one's going to inject us with like 600 cash back in, knock on wood, at most 3 months from now. Hopefully sooner than that, should be sooner than that. And this Louisiana deal is still looking really good as well. So can't rush the process. Deals are going to be there. We're growing steadily, working through the more difficult times as well, recapitalizing and going from there. So just to mention it from that side, and Land Daily Diligence just got off that. Some really solid deals reviewing there. Facebook group, we're almost at 1,000 members too. It's been steady growth there. Very exciting to see. And landpricer.ai, a ton more progress on that end. It's been hard to balance our funding business with that. A lot more work, continued steady progress there that I'll comment on shortly. Subscribe and share. With that, take care. Bye.